The champagne glass in Elena's hand trembled. Not from fear. From the kind of rage that burned so quietly, it could melt steel without making a sound. Across the glittering ballroom, her husband, the man she'd built an empire for, had his arm wrapped around another woman's waist, laughing like Elena didn't exist. He had no idea what he'd just started. Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. Wow, I hope you're having an incredible day, wherever you are in this big, wild world. Are you watching from the States? The UK? Maybe somewhere tropical where it's warm and I'm incredibly jealous? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I love connecting with you all. And listen, if you haven't already subscribed, please, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button right now. You're about to dive into a story that will have you on the edge of your seat, trust me. This one's special. This one's different. So buckle up, grab your tea or coffee or wine, no judgment here, and let's get into this. The Grand Meridian Hotel. That's where it happened. Where everything Elena had swallowed, endured, and sacrificed for 12 years came crashing down in a single, humiliating moment. The ballroom glittered like something out of a fever dream, crystal chandeliers dripping light onto marble floors, ice sculptures shaped like swans sweating under the warmth of 1,000 designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Old money and new money mingled, clinking glasses, air-kissing, pretending to care about the children's hospital this gala was supposedly benefiting. Elena stood near the champagne fountain, alone. She wore a deep emerald gown that hugged her curves with grace, the kind of dress that should have turned heads. And it did, but not for the reasons she deserved. The looks she got weren't admiration. They were pitiful. Whispered curiosity. The kind of glances that said, "Oh, that's her. Daniel Brooks' wife. Poor thing." She felt every single one of those stares like pinpricks on her skin. Elena took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. She'd chosen this dress carefully. She'd done her hair herself, elegant twists pinned with gold. She'd even practiced her smile in the mirror before leaving the house, the smile she'd wear while standing beside her husband, the powerful CEO, the man everyone respected. Except Daniel wasn't beside her. He was across the room. With her. Vivian Chase. 26. Blonde. Poured into a white dress so tight it looked painted on. She laughed at something Daniel said, her hand resting possessively on his chest, fingers splayed over the silk of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. And Daniel, her husband, leaned into it. He smiled down at Vivian like she was the only woman in the room. Like the vows he took 12 years ago were just decorative words that didn't mean a damn thing. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to look away. She should have looked away. But she couldn't. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying, but impossible to escape. Did you see that? The voice came from behind her. Low. Female. Delighted in that cruel way people get when they have gossip too good to keep to themselves. Elena didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew exactly who it was, Brenda Finch, one of the wives from Daniel's social circle. A woman who smiled to your face and sharpened her knives behind your back. I mean, he's not even trying to hide it, another voice chimed in. That's Vivian Chase. She works in his marketing department. Can you imagine? Poor Elena, Brenda said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. She just stands there and takes it. I could never. The words sliced through Elena like glass. She set her champagne down on the nearest table before she threw it. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she moved toward the exit. She wasn't running. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But she needed air. She needed space. She needed to think. But before she could reach the doors, a hand touched her arm. Leaving so soon, Mrs. Brooks? Elena froze. She turned slowly, and there he was, Harrison Finch, one of the board members of Brooks Global Enterprises. Slick back silver hair. Sharp suit. Sharper smile. I was just stepping out for a moment, Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Pity, Harrison said, his eyes flicking briefly toward Daniel and Vivian. I was hoping to get a chance to speak with you tonight. You know, Daniel's been doing remarkable things with the company. Just remarkable. His tone was patronizing. Like he was patting her on the head. Yes, Elena said softly. He has. Harrison leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Between you and me, though, he's been making some bold moves lately. Risky investments. Big expansions. The board is a little concerned. He paused, then added with a smirk, but I'm sure a man like Daniel knows what he's doing. Elena's pulse quickened. She knew exactly what Daniel was doing. And it wasn't smart. I'm sure he does, she replied coolly. Harrison chuckled and patted her shoulder like she was a child. Well, enjoy the gala, Mrs. Brooks. And do try the shrimp, they're divine. He walked away, leaving Elena standing there, her mind racing. She turned back toward the ballroom. Daniel had moved now. He and Vivian were standing near the stage, surrounded by a cluster of board members and investors. Vivian was laughing again, her hand looped through Daniel's arm like she belonged there. And Daniel, Daniel, looked so proud. So confident. Like he was king of the world. Then he saw her. For a split second, their eyes met across the room. Elena waited. Waited for the guilt. The shame. The flicker of remorse. But it never came. Instead, Daniel's jaw tightened. His expression shifted, not to apology, but to annoyance. Like she was an inconvenience. A smudge on his perfect night. He leaned down and whispered something in Vivian's ear. Vivian glanced at Elena. And then, she smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a nervous smile. A victorious one. Elena's breath caught. The room spun for a moment, the chandeliers blurring into streaks of gold. She felt the eyes on her again. The whispers growing louder. Phones being subtly raised, people recording, posting, sharing. This wasn't just humiliation. This was a public execution. And Daniel knew it. He wanted it. But here's the thing about Elena Brooks. The thing no one in that room knew. The thing Daniel had forgotten. She wasn't just the quiet wife who stayed in the background. She wasn't just the woman who supported him, loved him, sacrificed for him. She was the woman who owned him. Every building. Every contract. Every dollar that made Daniel Brooks the man he pretended to be. It was hers. All of it. And tonight, she decided, it was time for him to find out. What happens when a woman who gave everything finally takes it all back? Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this. Elena's hands shook as she stepped into the hotel's marble-walled ladies' room. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the sounds of the party, the laughter that wasn't meant for her, the music that felt like mockery, the conversations where her name was probably being whispered with pity. She stared at herself in the gilded mirror. The woman looking back at her was beautiful. Graceful. Dignified. But her eyes? Her eyes told a different story. They held 12 years of small compromises, swallowed pride, and love that had curdled into something she barely recognized. How did we get here, Daniel? 12 years ago. Elena closed her eyes and let herself remember. She was 26, fresh out of her MBA from Wharton, brilliant and hungry and full of dreams that felt bigger than her small-town Georgia roots. She'd landed a consulting job at a mid-tier firm in Chicago, working 18-hour days, living off coffee and pure ambition. That's where she met him. Daniel Brooks. 32. Charming in that effortless way that came from growing up with money and connections. He was trying to save his family's failing construction company, Brooks and Associates, a small firm his father had left him that was hemorrhaging money and drowning in debt. "I need a miracle," he'd said during their first meeting, his blue eyes desperate and honest. "And apparently, you're the woman who makes those happen." Elena had laughed. "Miracles are just good strategy and harder work. I can teach you both." She stayed late with him. Analyzed his books. Found the bleeding wounds in his business model. Restructured his debt. Identified the contracts that would save him. But more than that, she believed in him. "You could be building skyscrapers," she'd told him one night, both of them exhausted, surrounded by spreadsheets and empty coffee cups. "Not just houses. Empires, Daniel. You just need to think bigger." He looked at her like she'd handed him the sun. "Think bigger," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." 3 months later, Brooks and Associates was profitable. 6 months later, Daniel asked her to dinner. "This isn't about business," he'd said, standing in her office doorway in a navy suit that made his eyes look like ocean water. "This is about us." Elena's heart had stammered. She'd been fighting her feelings for him for months, telling herself it was just professional admiration. But the way he looked at her, like she was brilliant and beautiful and everything he'd never thought he'd be lucky enough to find, made her walls crumble. "There's an us?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "There's been an us since the day you walked into my office and saved my life," Daniel said. "I just didn't know if you felt it too." She did. God help her, she did. Their wedding was perfect. Small. Intimate. Elena wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit her curves. Daniel cried when she walked down the aisle, actual tears, right there in front of everyone. "I love you," he whispered when they kissed. "I love your brain, your heart, your laugh, the way you see possibilities where everyone else sees problems. I love all of you, Elena." She believed him. She believed him. The first 5 years were golden. Elena quit her consulting job to help Daniel full-time. She was the strategist behind every major decision, the architect of every expansion. When Brooks and Associates became Brooks Construction, that was her blueprint. When they landed their first high-rise contract, that was her negotiation. When they expanded into real estate development, that was her vision. "We're a team," Daniel would say, pulling her close after another successful presentation. "Brooks and Brooks. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" She worked 18-hour days again, but this time it felt different. They were building something together. A legacy. A future. And she was so in love. But Elena was smart. Maybe too smart for her own good. She'd seen what happened to women who put everything in their husband's name. Her own mother had done that, trusted her father with every asset, every decision, every piece of security she had. When he left for a younger woman, Elena's mother was destroyed. Financially. Emotionally. Completely. Never again, Elena had whispered to herself after her mother's funeral. Never again. So when Daniel wanted to incorporate as Brooks Global Enterprises, Elena made a suggestion. "Let me handle the paperwork," she'd said. "I know corporate law better than you do, and you're busy with the Henderson project." Daniel had kissed her forehead. "What would I do without you?" Elena smiled and filed the incorporation documents herself. Brooks Global Enterprises. CEO, Daniel Brooks. Majority shareholder, Elena Brooks. 51%. She'd used her inheritance from her grandmother, money Daniel didn't even know she had. Old money from a great-aunt who'd invested in Coca-Cola stock in the 1950s and let it grow for decades. Elena bought controlling interest in the company she had saved, she had built, she had grown from nothing. But she never told Daniel. She told herself it was insurance. Protection. A safety net she'd never need to use. She told herself it was smart. She never imagined it would become a weapon. Year 7 was when the cracks started showing. Success changed Daniel. Not all at once, that would have been easier to fight. It was gradual. Subtle. Like watching someone drift away in slow motion. He stopped asking for her opinion on major decisions. "I've got this one handled," he'd say when she tried to review contracts. He started taking meetings without her. "It's just boring investor stuff. You don't need to worry about it." He hired assistants. Consultants. Other people to do the work Elena had always done. "You deserve a break," he'd say when she protested. "Enjoy being a wife for once." But Elena didn't want to just be a wife. She wanted to be his partner. His equal. The woman he'd fallen in love with because she was brilliant and ambitious and had dreams as big as his own. Instead, she became a decoration. Pretty. Polite. Quiet. Year 9 was when Vivian joined the company. Fresh out of Northwestern. Marketing degree. Blonde hair that caught the light just right. Young enough to laugh at all of Daniel's jokes like they were comedy gold. "She's sharp," Daniel said after Vivian's first week. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." The way he said it, like Elena was past tense, made her stomach clench. "Used to know?" Elena asked. Daniel looked up from his laptop, distracted. You said she reminds you of someone you used to know. Who?" He paused. Blinked. Like he was seeing her for the first time in months. "You," he said softly. "She reminds me of you. When we first met. When we first met. When I was useful. When I was the woman who saved your company instead of the wife who gets in your way." Elena smiled and said nothing. But something inside her started to harden. Year 11 was when she saw them together. It was innocent enough. Daniel and Vivian working late, heads bent over a presentation. Laughing about something. Standing just a little too close. Elena brought them coffee. Played the supportive wife. "You two are working so hard," she said sweetly. "Don't forget to eat." Vivian looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that was polite on the surface but sharp underneath. "Daniel's been teaching me so much about the business," she said. "He's incredible. The way he built this company from nothing, it's inspiring." From nothing. Elena's hand tightened on the coffee tray. Daniel didn't correct her. Didn't say, "Actually, my wife saved the company. My wife built this empire. My wife is the reason we're not bankrupt." He just smiled and said, "Thank you, sweetheart," to Elena. Like she was the help. Like she was nothing. And now, year 12. Standing in this bathroom, staring at her reflection, Elena finally understood what had been happening. It wasn't just an affair. Daniel hadn't just replaced her in his bed. He'd replaced her in the story of their success. In his mind, he was the brilliant CEO who'd built an empire. He was the visionary. He was the power. Elena was just the wife. The accessory. The woman who stood beside him and looked pretty and stayed quiet. Well, Elena smiled at her reflection. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't called in years. Marcus Sterling, attorney at law. The best corporate lawyer in Chicago. Her old friend from business school. The man who'd helped her structure the original incorporation. The man who knew exactly what Elena Brooks really owned. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. No more quiet suffering. No more swallowing her pride for the sake of a marriage that was already dead. Elena thought about Daniel's hand on Vivian's waist. About the way he'd looked at her, not with guilt, but with annoyance. About 12 years of sacrifice and love and building something beautiful together, only to be treated like a stranger in her own life. She pressed the call. Marcus? It's Elena Brooks. I think it's time we had a conversation about Brooks Global Enterprises. A pause. Then Marcus's voice, warm and knowing. I've been wondering when you'd call. Tomorrow morning. Your office. And Marcus? Yes? Bring everything. Elena Brooks was about to remind the world who she really was. And Daniel? Daniel was about to lose everything he thought he'd built. The morning after the gala, Elena sat across from Marcus Sterling in his corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. 35 floors up, the city spread out beneath them like a chessboard waiting for the next move. Marcus looked exactly the same as he had in business school, sharp features, kind eyes, the sort of quiet confidence that came from never having to prove how smart he was. He'd built his firm into one of Chicago's most respected corporate law practices, the kind of place where billionaires went when they needed problems to disappear. Coffee? Marcus offered, gesturing to the French press on his desk. Please. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She clasped them in her lap, trying to center herself. Marcus poured 2 cups, steam rising between them like incense. You look tired. I feel like I've been sleeping for 12 years and just woke up. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Tell me what happened. So she did. She told him about the gala, about Vivian, about the way Daniel had looked at her, not with love, not with guilt, but with the cold indifference reserved for strangers. She told him about the whispers, the cameras, the humiliation that had been building for months but reached its crescendo in that ballroom. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. Jesus, Elena, he said finally. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Elena said, her voice hardening. Be helpful. I want to know exactly what I own, exactly what he's done with the company, and exactly what options I have. Marcus opened the thick folder that had been waiting on his desk. I pulled everything after your call last night. Elena. He paused, meeting her eyes. You're not going to like what I found. The numbers were devastating. Brooks Global Enterprises was hemorrhaging money. Daniel had been making increasingly risky investments, leveraging the company's assets for ventures that were failing spectacularly. A luxury resort in Costa Rica that had run into environmental lawsuits. A tech startup that burned through $5 million before producing anything functional. Real estate developments in markets that had collapsed. He's borrowed against everything, Marcus explained, sliding documents across the mahogany table. The office building. The warehouses. Even your house is collateral for a loan he took out 6 months ago. Elena's stomach dropped. Our house? Without your knowledge, I'm assuming. He forged your signature. Marcus's jaw tightened. Which, by the way, is fraud. Elena stared at the loan documents. There it was, her name, signed in handwriting that looked like hers but wasn't quite right. The E was wrong. Daniel had always been good at mimicry, but apparently not good enough. How much? She asked quietly. Total debt? $47 million. The company is 6 months away from bankruptcy if things don't turn around dramatically. $47 million. Elena felt the room spin slightly. But here's the interesting part, Marcus continued. Daniel's been telling the board that he's the majority shareholder. He's been making decisions as if he owns 51% of the company. But I do. Yes. You do. Which means every major decision he's made without your approval is technically. Marcus smiled grimly. Invalid. Elena looked up sharply. Invalid how? Elena, you own controlling interest. That means you have final say on all major corporate decisions. The Costa Rica resort? Tech investments? The loans against company assets? If you didn't approve them, and I'm guessing you didn't, then Daniel has been acting outside his authority as CEO. Elena's mind raced. What does that mean, practically? It means you can undo it. All of it. You can call in the loans, cancel the investments, fire him as CEO if you want to. Marcus leaned forward. Elena, you don't just own the company. You are the company. Daniel is essentially an employee who's been embezzling. An employee who's been embezzling. The words echoed in Elena's head as she walked through Grant Park an hour later, needing air and space to think. Joggers passed her on the lakefront trail, their breath visible in the crisp October air. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the woman in the designer coat walking among them was about to bring down an empire. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. Where are you? Vivian said she saw you downtown. We need to talk about last night. Elena stared at the message. The casual arrogance of it made her blood boil. Vivian said she saw you. Like his mistress was keeping tabs on his wife. Like that was normal. Acceptable. She typed back, at a meeting. We'll talk when I get home. His response was immediate. What kind of meeting? Elena smiled grimly and put her phone away without answering. Elena rarely came to the office anymore. Daniel had made it clear her presence wasn't needed, but today was different. Today, she had work to do. She walked through the glass doors of the 20th floor like she owned the place. Which, she reminded herself, she did. The receptionist, a young woman Elena didn't recognize, looked up with polite confusion. Can I help you? I'm Elena Brooks. I'm here to see the financial records. Oh. The receptionist looked flustered. Should I call Mr. Brooks? No need, Elena said smoothly. I'm the majority shareholder. I have a right to review company documents at any time. She'd done her homework during the drive over. Read the corporate bylaws Marcus had provided. Memorized her rights as the controlling owner. The receptionist made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones. A few minutes later, Harrison Finch appeared, the same board member who'd patronized her at the gala. Mrs. Brooks, he said, his smile tight. What a surprise. Daniel didn't mention you were coming by. Daniel doesn't know, Elena said. I'm here in my capacity as majority shareholder to review the company's financial records. I assume you'll provide access. Harrison's smile faltered. Well, perhaps we should wait for Daniel. Mr. Finch, Elena's voice carried a steel that surprised even her. I own 51% of this company. I don't need my husband's permission to review my own assets. Now, are you going to provide access to the records, or do I need to call my attorney? The threat hung in the air. Harrison's face went through several expressions before settling on resigned compliance. Of course, Mrs. Brooks. Right this way. The financial records were worse than Marcus had indicated. Elena spent 3 hours in the conference room, spreadsheets and bank statements spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene. The pattern was clear. Daniel had been systematically draining the company's resources for increasingly desperate investments. But it wasn't just bad judgment. It was reckless. Arrogant. The decisions of a man who believed his own hype so completely that he'd forgotten the basic principles of sound business. More troubling were the personal expenses charged to the company. Dinners at 5-star restaurants. Weekend trips to Napa Valley. A $40,000 necklace from Tiffany, purchased 3 weeks ago. Elena pulled out her phone and called Marcus. I'm looking at a credit card statement, she said without preamble. Tiffany and Company. $40,000. Want to bet I never saw that necklace? Personal expenses charged to a corporate account, Marcus said. That's embezzlement, Elena. Clear as day. How clear? Clear enough to press criminal charges if you want to. Elena stared at the receipt. October 15th. The day after their anniversary. The anniversary Daniel had forgotten, claiming he was too busy with work to celebrate. He'd bought a $40,000 necklace for his mistress on their anniversary and charged it to the company Elena owned. Marcus, Elena said quietly, I want to know everything. Every expense, every decision, every phone call. I want a complete audit of Daniel's activities as CEO. And I want it done quietly. How quietly? Daniel can't know. Not yet. I need time to plan. Plan what? Elena looked around the conference room where she'd once sat as Daniel's equal, his partner, his wife. Where she'd helped build Brooks Global from a failing construction company into a $100 million empire. Where she was now invisible. Plan his downfall, she said. That evening, Elena sat in their kitchen, waiting. She'd made dinner, Daniel's favorite, chicken marsala with roasted vegetables, and opened a bottle of wine. The dining room table was set with their wedding china, candles flickering softly. To anyone looking in, it would seem like a wife trying to reconnect with her husband after a difficult evening. It wasn't. It was reconnaissance. Daniel arrived home at 8:30, his tie loosened, looking tired. He paused in the doorway when he saw the setup. What's all this? He asked, his tone cautious. I thought we should talk, Elena said, pouring wine into his glass. About last night. About us. Daniel sat down slowly, watching her face. Elena, It's okay, she said, cutting him off. I understand. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You do. Elena nodded, taking a sip of wine. I've been thinking about it all day. About how things have changed between us. How you've grown and evolved as a businessman. She paused. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Daniel. Building the company into what it is today, that takes vision. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly. This was the Elena he was comfortable with, supportive, admiring, quiet. Thank you, he said. That means a lot. Tell me about the Costa Rica project, Elena said, cutting into her chicken. It sounds exciting. For the next hour, Daniel talked about his investments, his strategies, his vision for the future. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed his own mythology, that he was a self-made success, a brilliant CEO who'd built an empire through sheer force of will. Elena listened and asked questions and smiled at all the right moments. And she took mental notes of every lie, every half-truth, every detail that would be useful later. You know what I love about you? Daniel said as they finished dessert, the wine making him sentimental. You believe in me. Even when things get complicated, you're always in my corner. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Always, she said softly. It wasn't a lie. She had always believed in him. Had always been in his corner. Right up until the moment he'd chosen another woman's corner instead. Daniel, she said, her voice gentle, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? With how things are between us. Daniel's hand stiffened slightly in hers. What do you mean? I feel like we've grown apart. Like maybe we want different things now. Elena looked down at their joined hands. Maybe it would be better if we took some time apart to figure things out. She could see the relief flood his features. The guilt he'd been carrying transformed into hope that she was going to make this easy for him. Elena, he said carefully, if that's what you think is best. I do. She squeezed his hand. I think it would be good for both of us. Some space. Some time to think. Daniel nodded, trying to look sad while failing to hide his excitement. If that's what you want. It is. Elena smiled. And Daniel? Don't worry about the business stuff. I know you're under a lot of pressure. Just focus on what makes you happy. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, the gesture tender and completely hollow. You're incredible, Elena. I don't deserve you. She smiled up at him. No, she thought. You don't. After Daniel left for his business dinner, which Elena knew was a night with Vivian, she sat alone in their kitchen and made a list. Things Daniel doesn't know. I own controlling interest in his company. I know about every illegal expense, every forged signature, every breach of fiduciary duty. I have the power to fire him and seize all assets. I've been documenting everything. I'm not the broken wife he thinks I am. Things I need to do. Complete the financial audit. Gather evidence of the affair. Prepare for the board meeting next month. Find out exactly how deep Vivian's involvement goes. Plan the perfect moment to strike. Elena looked at the list and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Power. Daniel thought he was playing chess while she sat on the sidelines. He had no idea she'd been playing 3 moves ahead for 12 years. And now? Now it was time for checkmate. 3 weeks later. Elena had become a shadow in her own life, and she was perfect at it. She played the role of the grieving wife seeking space, the woman stepping back from her marriage with quiet dignity. She moved into the guest bedroom, citing the need for time to think. She smiled sadly when Daniel's friends asked how she was doing. She let people whisper about her with pity. What they didn't see was the war room she'd created in the downtown apartment she'd rented under her maiden name. Brooks versus Brooks. That's what she'd written on the whiteboard that dominated one wall of the small office space. Below it, she'd mapped out 12 years of financial records, decision trees showing every major corporate move, and a timeline of Daniel's relationship with Vivian that made her stomach turn. The affair had been going on for 8 months. Not weeks. Months. Elena sat in front of her laptop at 2 a.m., going through credit card statements Marcus had subpoenaed. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for: dinners for 2 at restaurants Elena had never been to, hotel charges in cities where Daniel claimed to be traveling alone, purchases at lingerie stores where Elena never shopped. But it was the Cartier receipt from July that made her hands shake. Cartier love bracelet. $8,500. Corporate account. July 15th, Elena's birthday. The birthday Daniel had forgotten because he was drowning in the Henderson project deadlines. He'd bought his mistress an $8,000 bracelet on his wife's birthday and charged it to the company Elena owned. Son of a bitch, she whispered to the empty apartment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel, working late again. Don't wait up. Elena looked at the timestamp, 2:17 a.m. She opened her laptop's mapping software and tracked his location. The Fairmont Hotel. Presidential suite. The same suite where Vivian's credit card showed a charge for business entertainment earlier that evening. Elena closed the laptop and poured herself another glass of wine. Tomorrow, she was going to destroy them both. Elena had been attending board meetings for years, but always as Daniel's wife, smiling, supportive, essentially decorative. Today, she walked into the conference room as something different. An owner. The board members looked surprised to see her. Harrison Finch half rose from his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Brooks," he said carefully. "We weren't expecting you today." "I'm sure you weren't," Elena replied, taking the seat at the foot of the table, directly opposite Daniel's chair at the head. "But as majority shareholder, I have a right to attend all board meetings." A murmur went around the room. Several members exchanged glances. "Majority shareholder?" asked Margaret Flores, the board's financial advisor. "I'm sorry, but according to our records, Daniel holds 51% of." "According to your records," Elena interrupted, her voice calm but steel-edged. "But corporate records tell a different story." She opened the briefcase beside her and pulled out a stack of documents. Articles of incorporation, filed 12 years ago. Share distribution agreements. Transfer documents. She slid copies across the table to each member. "I think you'll find everything in order." Harrison picked up his copy, his face going pale as he read. This can't be right." "I assure you, it's very right," Elena said. "I've owned 51% of this company since its incorporation. The question is why your records show otherwise." The room fell silent except for the shuffling of papers and the sound of 12 powerful people realizing they'd been operating under false information for over a decade. Margaret Flores looked up from the documents. "Mrs. Brooks, if this is accurate, then every major decision this board has made should have been approved by me first," Elena finished. "Yes." The conference room door opened, and Daniel walked in, looking confident and commanding in his tailored navy suit. He was halfway to his chair when he saw Elena sitting at the opposite end of the table. He stopped dead. "Elena?" His voice carried confusion and the first edge of alarm. "What are you doing here?" "Attending a board meeting of the company I own," Elena replied evenly. Daniel's eyes flicked to the documents spread across the table, and she watched the color drain from his face. "I think," Elena continued, "we need to have a conversation about the direction of Brooks Global Enterprises. Starting with some irregularities I've discovered in our financial records." The next 2 hours were surgical. Elena had prepared for this moment like a general planning a battle. Every document was in order, every fact double-checked, every question anticipated. She started with the obvious discrepancies: personal expenses charged to corporate accounts, decisions made without board approval, loans taken against company assets without proper authorization. "The Costa Rica Resort Project," Elena said, pulling up financial projections on the conference room screen. "Approved by this board 6 months ago based on feasibility studies that were optimistic." She clicked to the next slide. "Here's the actual environmental impact report, filed with Costa Rican authorities 3 weeks before our investment decision." The report was devastating. The resort site was built on protected wetlands. The project had been dead in the water before Brooks Global invested $12 million. "Did anyone on this board see this report?" Elena asked. Silence. Daniel shifted in his chair. "Elena, I don't think this is the appropriate forum." "I think this is exactly the appropriate forum," Elena said, her voice cutting across his. "Particularly since this investment was made without my approval as majority shareholder." Margaret Flores leaned forward. "Mr. Brooks, did you know about the environmental issues when you recommended the investment?" "Of course not," Daniel said, but there was sweat beading on his forehead. "We conducted full due diligence." "Conducted by whom?" Elena asked. "Because I have a consulting contract here, and it's signed by someone named Victoria Chase." Elena clicked to the next slide, showing a corporate registration document. "Chase Environmental Consulting. Incorporated 4 months before our Costa Rica investment. Sole proprietor, Vivian Chase." The silence in the room was deafening. "Your mistress," Elena continued conversationally, "set up a fake environmental consulting company and sold us a fraudulent feasibility study for $12 million. That's not just adultery, Daniel. That's a conspiracy to commit fraud." Daniel shot to his feet. "Elena, that's enough." "Sit down," Elena said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Daniel sat. Elena clicked to the next slide. "Here's the paper trail. Vivian's company received $300,000 for the Costa Rica study. The same day, Vivian Chase personally received a $50,000 bonus for exceptional performance in the marketing department." She looked directly at Daniel. "Guess who approved that bonus?" Harrison Finch was staring at the documents like they might bite him. "Mr. Brooks, is this true?" "It's not what it looks like." "What it looks like," Elena interrupted, "is embezzlement and fraud. What it looks like is a CEO using company resources to enrich his mistress while bankrupting the business his wife built." Margaret Flores's voice was barely a whisper. "How much are we talking about?" Elena clicked to her final slide. A comprehensive breakdown of every questionable expense, every fraudulent investment, every dollar that had been diverted from company operations to fund Daniel's personal life. $47 million, she said. That's how much has been stolen from this company over the past 2 years. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 47 million, Elena repeated. Charged with the company I own. By the man I trusted with everything. Daniel tried to fight back. Elena, you're taking things out of context. These were legitimate business expenses. A $40,000 necklace from Tiffany is a legitimate business expense. Elena's voice was deadly quiet. That was a gift for a client. Which client? Elena asked. Because I have the delivery receipt. It was sent to Vivian Chase's apartment. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Elena stood up, every eye in the room following her movement. Ladies and gentlemen, as the majority shareholder of Brooks Global Enterprises, I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Daniel Brooks as Chief Executive Officer. The words echoed in the conference room like a gunshot. Elena, Daniel said, his voice cracking. Please, don't do this. We can work this out? Work what out? Elena asked. The fact that you've been systematically stealing from the company? The fact that you've been having an affair for 8 months? The fact that you forged my signature on loan documents and charged your mistress's shopping sprees to my business. She walked around the table slowly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Or maybe we should work out the fact that you've been lying to this board for 2 years about who actually owns this company. Elena stopped behind Daniel's chair. He was trembling. You humiliated me in public, she said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. You treated me like I was nothing. You erased me from the story of what we built together. She leaned down, her mouth close to his ear. Did you really think I was that weak? That stupid? That broken? Elena straightened up and looked around the table. All in favor of removing Daniel Brooks as CEO? One by one, hands went up around the table. Harrison Finch. Margaret Flores. Every single board member. When the vote was complete, Elena smiled. Motion carries unanimously, she said. Daniel, you're fired. But Elena wasn't done. As Daniel sat in stunned silence, Elena opened her briefcase again. There's one more thing, she said. I've been in touch with the FBI's corporate fraud division. They'll want to speak with all of us about the Costa Rica investment and several other transactions that may constitute criminal activity. Daniel's head snapped up. Elena, no. Please. They'll also want to speak with Vivian Chase about her consulting company and its relationship with Brooks Global. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. I believe the term is conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The color completely drained from Daniel's face. That's a federal crime, Daniel. 10 to 20 years in prison. Elena gathered her documents and put them back in her briefcase. Oh, and gentlemen? Ladies? I'll be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer immediately. My first official act will be canceling all of Mr. Brooks' corporate credit cards and freezing his access to company accounts. She paused at the door. Mr. Brooks, you have until Friday to clear out your office. Security will escort you from the building if necessary. Elena walked out, leaving behind 12 years of marriage, a roomful of stunned board members, and the broken remains of the man she'd once loved more than life itself. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and called Marcus. It's done, she said. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Elena looked back at the conference room where Daniel was probably still sitting in shock, realizing that the quiet wife he dismissed and betrayed had just taken everything away from him. Powerful, she said. And Elena? Yeah? This is just the beginning. Wait until he finds out about the house. Elena smiled as she walked toward the elevator. Oh, she was just getting started. That evening, Elena sat in her downtown apartment, working. Not hiding. Not crying. Not mourning the end of her marriage. Working. She had a company to save, a fraud to unravel, and a dozen lawsuits to prepare. She had employees whose jobs depended on her fixing the mess Daniel had created. She had a legacy to protect. Her phone had been buzzing all afternoon, calls from Daniel that she'd ignored, texts begging her to reconsider, voicemails promising he could explain everything. Finally, around 9 p.m., she answered. Elena, please, Daniel's voice was raw, desperate. Let me come over. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Elena said calmly. You stole from me. You lied to me. You betrayed me in every way it's possible to betray someone. I love you, Daniel said, and the words sounded hollow. I made mistakes, but I love you. Elena looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, lights twinkling like stars. You know what's funny, she said. I actually believe that you think you love me. But you don't love me, Daniel. You love the idea of me. The supportive wife. The woman who stays quiet and makes you look good. That's not true. You love the woman who saved your company and then stepped aside so you could take credit. You love the woman who sacrificed her own ambitions to build your empire. You love the woman who stayed invisible so you could shine. Elena's voice was steady, almost gentle. But Daniel? That woman is gone. She died the night you humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. What's left is just me. Elena Brooks. The woman who owns everything you thought was yours. Silence on the other end of the line. The FBI will want to talk to you tomorrow, Elena continued. I'd suggest getting a lawyer. A good one. You're going to need it. She hung up and went back to work. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. And for the first time in years, Elena felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Elena had never been inside a federal building before. The security was intense, metal detectors, ID checks, armed guards who looked like they meant business. As she was escorted through sterile corridors toward the white-collar crime division, she felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation that reminded her of the first time she'd walked into Daniel's office 12 years ago. She was about to save a company again. Just not his company this time. Agent Sandra Martinez was younger than Elena expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from dealing with corporate criminals who thought they were smarter than the law. Mrs. Brooks, Agent Martinez said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Thank you for coming in. I've reviewed the preliminary documents your attorney provided, and I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive cases of corporate fraud I've seen in years. Elena set her briefcase on the floor. How comprehensive? Comprehensive enough that we're opening a formal investigation into Brooks Global Enterprises, Daniel Brooks, and Vivian Chase. Agent Martinez opened a thick file. Let's start with Ms. Chase. Tell me about her relationship with your husband. For the next 3 hours, Elena laid out everything. The fake consulting company. The fraudulent environmental reports. The personal expenses charged to corporate accounts. The pattern of deception that went back months, maybe years. But it was Agent Martinez who dropped the bombshell that changed everything. Mrs. Brooks, the agent said, sliding a photograph across the desk. Do you recognize this woman? Elena looked at the photo. It was Vivian, but younger. Maybe college-aged. She was standing next to a man in handcuffs being led away by federal agents. That's Vivian, but I don't understand. Vivian Chase's real name is Vivian Castellano. She's the daughter of Anthony Castellano, who was convicted of securities fraud 8 years ago. He ran a Ponzi scheme that bilked investors out of $60 million. Elena's blood went cold. She's not just some young marketing executive who fell for your husband, Agent Martinez continued. She's a professional con artist who targeted your husband specifically. The question is why? Elena stared at the photograph, her mind racing. How long have you known about her? We've been tracking her for 2 years. She's been involved in at least 3 similar schemes, targeting wealthy men, gaining access to their companies, and systematically draining assets. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Brooks, your husband isn't just an unfaithful spouse. He's a mark. And Vivian Chase has been playing him from day one. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Daniel wasn't just weak. He wasn't just selfish. He was a victim. A victim who had victimized her in turn, but still, the woman who'd destroyed their marriage, who'd humiliated Elena in public, who'd stolen millions from their company, she wasn't even real. How much has she taken? Elena asked. Based on your documentation? At least 12 million in direct transfers. But there's more. Agent Martinez pulled out another file. She's been using Brooks Global's corporate information to set up shell companies. Fake vendors, consulting firms, service providers. Money goes out, nothing comes back. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. How much more? We're still calculating, but our forensic accountants estimate somewhere around $25 million total. $25 million. Elena thought about the fundraising gala, about Vivian's triumphant smile as she hung on Daniel's arm. About the way she'd looked at Elena, not with guilt or shame, but with the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd successfully eliminated competition. Agent Martinez, Elena said slowly, what happens to Daniel? That depends on how cooperative he is. If he was genuinely deceived, if he can prove he didn't know about her real identity or her criminal activities. The agent shrugged. He might face civil liability and some minor charges. If he was complicit? Prison. 20 years. Maybe more. Elena stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the man she'd loved, the man she'd built a life with, the man who'd humiliated her and stolen from her and broken her heart in ways she was still discovering. I want to help, she said. Agent Martinez raised an eyebrow. Help how? I want to help you catch her. Elena walked into her office, not the guest chair she'd occupied for years, and felt the weight of 12 years of invisible work finally being acknowledged. The nameplate on the door read Elena Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, in elegant gold lettering. She'd had it made that morning. Her assistant, Daniel's former assistant, who'd transferred to Elena without a single question, knocked on the door. Mrs. Brooks? There's a call for you. Line 1. Elena picked up the phone. Elena Brooks. Elena, it's Marcus. We have a problem. Elena's stomach tightened. What kind of problem? Daniel's hired Jonathan Pierce. Elena knew that name. Everyone in corporate Chicago knew that name. Jonathan Pierce was the criminal defense attorney you hired when you were guilty but thought you could buy your way out of it. He was expensive, ruthless, and very good at making evidence disappear. He's fighting back, Elena said. More than that. Pierce is claiming Daniel was manipulated by you. That you've been controlling the company all along and using him as a front. That the whole thing is a setup to frame him for embezzlement. Elena felt the room spin slightly. That's insane. Insane, but potentially effective. Pierce is good at flipping narratives. He's going to argue that Daniel is the victim here, that you orchestrated the affair, that you set up Vivian to seduce him, that the whole thing is an elaborate scheme to steal his company. His company? Elena's voice rose. Marcus, I own this company. I've owned it for 12 years. I know. But Pierce is going to argue that those ownership documents were backdated. That you filed them recently to support your fraud case against Daniel. Elena sat down heavily in her chair. Daniel wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to rewrite history itself. Can he prove that? No. But he doesn't have to prove it. He just has to create reasonable doubt. And Elena, there's something else. What? Pierce has subpoenaed your financial records going back 15 years. He's looking for anything that suggests you had the money to buy controlling interest in the company when you claim you did. Elena's blood chilled. Her grandmother's inheritance, the Coca-Cola stock that had made her Brooks global purchase possible, had come from sources that were complicated. Old family money that had been moved through multiple accounts, some offshore, all perfectly legal but potentially difficult to trace. Marcus. I know. We'll fight it. But Elena, you need to be prepared. Pierce is going to try to destroy your credibility before this gets to trial. He's going to make you look like a criminal mastermind who's been planning this for years. After Marcus hung up, Elena sat alone in her office, looking out at the city she'd helped build through the success of Brooks Global. 12 years of work. 12 years of sacrifice. 12 years of quiet strength that was now being painted as manipulation and fraud. Daniel wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to make her the villain. That evening, Elena's phone rang. She was in her downtown apartment, surrounded by legal documents and financial records, preparing for the war she hadn't wanted but was determined to win. The caller ID showed Daniel's number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Elena. His voice was different. Harder. We need to talk. I think we're past talking, Daniel. Pierce thinks we can work something out. A settlement. You drop the charges, and we split everything 50-50. Clean slate. Elena almost laughed. Split everything 50-50? Daniel, I own everything. There's nothing to split. That's where you're wrong. Daniel's voice carried a confidence that made her stomach clench. Pierce has been digging into your finances. That money you used to buy into the company? The inheritance from your grandmother? It's interesting how that money moved around before you invested it. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Money laundering is a serious crime, Elena. Even if it was your money to begin with, the way you moved it through those offshore accounts. He paused. Pierce thinks a jury might find that suspicious. You son of a bitch, Elena whispered. Drop the charges, Daniel continued, and I'll make sure Pierce doesn't pursue that line of investigation. We both walk away. You keep the company, I take half the assets, and we pretend this never happened. Elena felt 12 years of love and trust and partnership crumbling into dust. And Vivian? She asked. What about her? She's a con artist, Daniel. She's stolen millions from you, from us. The FBI has been tracking her for years. Silence on the other end of the line. Daniel? Elena said. Did you hear me? She's not who you think she is. I heard you, Daniel said quietly. And it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter? Elena's voice rose. She's a criminal. So are you, apparently. Daniel's voice was cold now, all pretense of emotion gone. The difference is, I love her. And I'm not going to let you destroy her to save yourself. The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone, understanding finally settling over her like ice water. Daniel knew. He knew exactly who Vivian was, what she'd done, how she'd manipulated him. And he didn't care. He'd chosen her anyway. FBI field office. The next morning. He knows, Elena told Agent Martinez. Daniel knows exactly who she is. Agent Martinez looked up from the surveillance photos spread across her desk. You're sure? I told him she was a con artist, that you'd been tracking her, that she'd stolen millions. He said it didn't matter. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. He's protecting her. Which makes him complicit, Agent Martinez said grimly. Mrs. Brooks, this changes everything. If your husband knowingly participated in Vivian's schemes, how long does he get? With conspiracy charges? 30 years minimum. Elena stared at the photos, surveillance shots of Vivian entering and leaving banks, meeting with known criminals, setting up the shell companies that had drained Brooks Global's accounts. 30 years. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction. Justice. The man who'd humiliated her, who'd betrayed her, who'd tried to destroy her reputation to save himself, he deserved whatever consequences came his way. But 30 years. Agent Martinez, Elena said slowly, if I testify against him, if I provide everything I have, what are the chances he'll cooperate? Turn on Vivian? Given what his attorney is threatening? Slim to none. Pierce has convinced him that you're the real criminal here. Agent Martinez leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Brooks, I have to ask, are you having second thoughts about prosecuting your husband? Elena thought about Daniel's voice on the phone the night before. The coldness. The calculation. The way he'd threatened to destroy her reputation to protect the woman who'd been stealing from them both. She thought about 12 years of marriage. Of building something beautiful together. Of love that had been real once, even if it was dead now. She thought about Vivian's smile at the gala. About the way she'd looked at Elena, not like a mistress caught with someone's husband, but like a predator who'd successfully eliminated competition. No, Elena said finally. I'm not having second thoughts. Good. Because we're going to need your help with something else. Agent Martinez pulled out a new file. Vivian doesn't know we're onto her yet. Daniel's lawyer is keeping him quiet, hoping to work out a deal. But Vivian, she's still operating like she's in control. Elena looked up sharply. What do you mean? She's planning to disappear. Our surveillance shows her liquidating assets, closing accounts, preparing to leave the country. Agent Martinez met Elena's eyes. Mrs. Brooks, we need to catch her in the act. And we need your help to do it. What kind of help? Agent Martinez smiled. The kind that involves you being bait. The plan was simple. Elena would call Vivian and request a meeting. She'd pretend to be the devastated wife, ready to negotiate. Ready to pay Vivian to disappear quietly without destroying what was left of her marriage. She'll think you're weak, Agent Martinez explained. She'll think you're exactly what she's been counting on, the abandoned wife who'll pay anything to get her husband back. Elena looked at the script they'd prepared. The words felt like poison in her mouth. What if she doesn't believe it? She'll believe it, Agent Martinez said confidently. Because it's what she wants to believe. It fits her narrative, that you're the pathetic wife and she's the powerful woman who won. Elena thought about that narrative. About how many people had believed it over the years. About how she'd let them believe it, choosing quiet strength over public recognition. When? Elena asked. Tomorrow. We'll wire you, have surveillance teams in place. All you have to do is get her talking. Get her to admit what she's done, who she really is. Get her to incriminate herself on tape. Elena nodded. And Daniel? He'll be arrested the moment we have Vivian in custody. No warnings, no deals, no last-minute negotiations from Jonathan Pierce. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Brooks, I have to ask one more time, are you ready for this? Once we move forward, there's no going back. Your marriage is over. Your husband is going to prison. Everything you've built together. Everything I've built, Elena corrected quietly. And yes, Agent Martinez. I'm ready. As Elena left the FBI building that afternoon, she thought about the woman she'd been 24 hours ago. The woman who'd still hoped, somewhere in her heart, that Daniel would come to his senses. That he'd realize what he was throwing away. That love would triumph over manipulation and greed. That woman was gone. What was left was Elena Brooks, CEO, majority shareholder, and the architect of the most satisfying downfall in corporate Chicago history. Tomorrow, she would look Vivian Chase in the eye and smile. And then she would watch her world burn. That night, Elena called Daniel one last time. She didn't have to. The FBI hadn't asked her to. But she needed him to hear it from her. Daniel, she said when he answered. It's Elena. Elena. His voice was wary. Have you thought about Pierce's offer? I have. Elena looked out at the Chicago skyline, lights twinkling like fallen stars. And I want you to know something. What? I loved you. I really, genuinely loved you. For 12 years, I believed we were building something beautiful together. I believed in us. Silence on the other end. And when you chose her over me, when you humiliated me in front of everyone we knew, when you tried to erase me from our story, I still hoped you'd come back to yourself. Come back to the man I fell in love with. Elena. I'm not finished. Her voice was steady, final. Tomorrow morning, you're going to be arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud. Vivian is going to be arrested for embezzlement, money laundering, and running a criminal enterprise. And I'm going to watch it happen. Daniel's breath caught. You can't. I can. And I will. Because the man I loved would never have chosen a criminal over his wife. The man I loved would never have stolen from the company we built together. The man I loved would never have threatened to destroy my reputation to save himself. Elena's voice softened. That man is already gone, Daniel. Tomorrow, I'm just making it official. She hung up and turned off her phone. Tomorrow, Elena Brooks was going to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her. And she was going to enjoy every second of it. Elena sat in the elegant lobby, her hands folded in her lap, the picture of a broken wife waiting to surrender. The hidden microphone taped to her ribs felt like it was burning against her skin, but her expression remained perfectly composed, defeated, desperate, exactly what Vivian would expect to see. She dressed carefully for this performance. A simple black dress, minimal makeup, her wedding ring still on her finger despite everything. She wanted to look like a woman clinging to the wreckage of her marriage, not the CEO who'd systematically dismantled her husband's life piece by piece. Across the lobby, she could see Agent Martinez pretending to read a newspaper. 2 other agents were positioned at the bar, nursing coffee they probably couldn't taste through their nerves. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from the surveillance team confirming that Vivian was on her way up from the parking garage. Elena took a slow breath. 12 years of quiet strength had led to this moment. Time to see if all that patience had been worth it. The elevator doors opened, and Vivian stepped out. She looked triumphant. That was the only word for it. Designer handbag, perfectly styled hair, walking with the confidence of a woman who thought she'd already won. She spotted Elena immediately and walked over with that predatory smile Elena had grown to despise. Elena, Vivian said, sliding into the chair across from her. You look tired. I am tired, Elena replied, her voice carrying just the right note of defeat. Tired of fighting. Tired of pretending I don't know what's happening. Vivian's eyes lit up with satisfaction. I'm glad you called. I was hoping we could talk like adults. Elena almost laughed at the irony. Adults. As if there was anything adult about stealing millions of dollars and destroying families for sport. I want to know what it's going to take, Elena said quietly. For you to disappear. To leave my husband alone. Vivian leaned back in her chair, savoring the moment. Your husband? Elena, sweetie, I don't think Daniel is your husband anymore. Not in any way that matters. The words stung, but Elena let them. Let Vivian see the pain flicker across her face. He loves you, Elena said, the words bitter in her mouth. Yes, Vivian replied simply. He does. Finally found a woman who appreciates what he's built. What he's accomplished. What he's built. Elena bit her tongue to keep from correcting her. How much? Elena asked. How much money do you want to walk away? Vivian tilted her head, considering. That's not really how this works, Elena. See, Daniel and we're planning a future together. A real future. And that future requires resources. Resources? Vivian's smile turned sharp. The company, for instance. The house. The investment accounts. All those lovely assets that Daniel's worked so hard to accumulate. Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Those aren't just his assets. Aren't they? Vivian leaned forward. I mean, legally speaking, sure, you might have some claim. But practically? Elena, sweetheart, you haven't been involved in running that company for years. Everyone knows Daniel built Brooks Global from nothing. You were just along for the ride. From nothing. There it was. The lie Vivian had been selling Daniel, and that Daniel had been selling himself. I helped build that company, Elena said, letting real emotion creep into her voice. I saved it when Daniel inherited a bankrupt construction firm. Vivian waved a dismissive hand. Ancient history. What matters now is who's actually running things. Who's making the decisions? Who's? She paused, smiling. Who's sleeping in the CEO's bed? Elena felt sick, but she pressed on. So what are you saying? You want everything? I'm saying Daniel and I want to start fresh. Clean slate. New life. Vivian's eyes glittered. And that means liquidating some assets to fund our new ventures. New ventures? Oh, Elena. Vivian laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. You have no idea how big this is, do you? Brooks Global is just the beginning. Daniel's contacts, his reputation, his access to investment circles, there are so many opportunities out there for people who know how to take advantage of them. Elena's blood chilled. Vivian wasn't just planning to steal from Brooks Global. She was planning to use Daniel as a front for an ongoing criminal enterprise. What kind of opportunities? Elena asked. Vivian's smile turned predatory. The kind that requires initial capital. Seed money. Development funds. She leaned closer. Amazing how much money you can move around when you have a legitimate business as cover. Amazing how many investors will trust a successful CEO with their retirement funds. She's talking about another Ponzi scheme, Elena realized. Using Daniel's reputation to run the same scam her father did. Investors? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Pension funds. Retirement accounts. Charitable foundations. Vivian's eyes were bright with excitement. People with money who trust successful businessmen like Daniel. People who won't ask too many questions as long as the returns look good. Elena thought about Agent Martinez listening to this conversation through her wire. About the recording devices capturing every word of Vivian's confession to planning securities fraud on a massive scale. How much money? Elena asked. Start small. Maybe 50 million. Once we establish credibility, the sky's the limit. Vivian sat back, looking pleased with herself. Your husband is going to make us very, very rich, Elena. Richer than you could ever imagine. And what happens to the people who invest? The pension funds? The retirees who trust you with their life savings? Vivian shrugged. That's not my problem. People are greedy. They see huge returns and stop thinking clearly. If they're stupid enough to hand over their money without doing proper due diligence, well, that's natural selection, isn't it? Elena stared at this woman, this beautiful, charming monster who was planning to destroy the lives of thousands of innocent people. You're talking about ruining families, Elena said. Destroying people's retirements. Their security. I'm talking about business, Vivian corrected coldly. It's not personal, Elena. It's just efficient resource redistribution. Elena felt the microphone against her ribs and knew every word was being captured. Vivian had just confessed to planning one of the largest financial frauds in Chicago history. And Daniel? Elena asked. Does he know about your plans? Vivian's smile faltered slightly. Daniel is learning to think bigger. To see the possibilities instead of just the limitations. He doesn't know, Elena realized. You're planning to use him without telling him what you're really doing. Daniel doesn't need to know the details, Vivian said, her voice hardening. He just needs to follow my lead. Make the introductions. Sign the documents. Be the face of the operation. And when it all falls apart? When the FBI comes after you? What happens to Daniel then? Vivian's laugh was cruel. Oh, Elena. Sweet, naive Elena. When this falls apart, and eventually it will, they always do, Daniel will be holding the bag. His name will be on everything. His reputation will take the hit. His life will be destroyed. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I'll be in the Cayman Islands with a new identity and $50 million, watching it all on the news. Elena felt the world tilt around her. Daniel wasn't just Vivian's accomplice. He was her next victim. She was planning to frame him for everything and disappear, leaving him to face the consequences of crimes he didn't even know he was committing. You're going to destroy him, Elena whispered. I'm going to use him, Vivian corrected. The same way he used you for 12 years. The same way men have been using women forever. The only difference is, I'm better at it. Elena looked into Vivian's eyes and saw nothing human there. No remorse, no conscience, no recognition that the lives she was planning to destroy belonged to real people with families and dreams and futures. Why? Elena asked. Why Daniel? Why us? Vivian tilted her head, considering the question. Research. I spent months identifying targets, successful CEOs with liquid assets and trusting wives. Daniel Brooks checked every box. Wealthy, arrogant, emotionally neglected spouse. She smiled. You made it easy, Elena. Playing the quiet little wife. Never asserting yourself. Never fighting for what was yours. Daniel was practically begging to be seduced by a woman who made him feel powerful. The words hit Elena like physical blows, but she forced herself to stay calm. And the company? Brooks Global? Was supposed to be a quick score. Drain the accounts, liquidate some assets, disappear before anyone noticed. Vivian's expression darkened. But then you had to go and complicate things. Had to start asking questions. Had to hire lawyers and accountants and make everything difficult. Elena's heart pounded. So you're leaving? Oh, I'm leaving, Vivian said. Tonight. Private jet to Grand Cayman, then on to somewhere with no extradition treaty. But not before I finish what I started. What do you mean? Vivian pulled out her phone and showed Elena a banking app. $43 million. That's what's left in Brooks Global's operating accounts after all of Daniel's investments. I have transfer authorization on all of it. Elena's blood turned to ice. $43 million. The company's entire liquid assets. You're going to bankrupt the company? I'm going to take what I'm owed for 2 years of pretending to love that pathetic man, Vivian said coldly. 2 years of listening to him talk about his brilliant business strategies. 2 years of pretending his mediocre sex life was satisfying. 2 years of playing second fiddle to his boring, invisible wife. Vivian's mask had completely slipped now. The charming seductress was gone, replaced by a cold-blooded predator. Elena, darling, you want to know the truth? Your husband is an idiot. A useful idiot, but still an idiot. He actually believes he built that company. He actually thinks he's a brilliant CEO instead of a trust fund baby who married up and got lucky. Elena felt her hands clench into fists under the table. And you? You're even worse. You had real power, controlling interest in $100 million company, and you gave it away. You sat in the background and let him take credit for everything you built. You played the supportive wife while he treated you like hired help. Vivian leaned back, shaking her head in disgust. Women like you make me sick. All that potential, all that intelligence, wasted on a man who doesn't deserve it. At least when I destroy him, it'll be for a reason. You destroyed yourself for free. Elena had heard enough. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, setting it on the table between them. You know what's funny, Vivian? Elena said, her voice steady for the first time in the conversation. Vivian looked confused. What? You keep talking about how stupid Daniel is. How stupid I am. How easy we were to manipulate. Elena smiled. But you made one crucial mistake. What mistake? Elena turned her phone around so Vivian could see the screen. It showed an active recording app that had been running for the entire conversation. You assumed I was still the invisible wife who wouldn't fight back. Vivian's face went white. You recorded me? Every word. Elena's smile widened. Including your confession to planning a $50 million securities fraud. Including your admission to stealing $43 million from Brooks Global. Including your detailed explanation of how you were going to frame my husband for crimes you committed. Vivian lunged for the phone, but Elena was ready. She pulled it back and stood up. Too late, Elena said. It's already uploaded to cloud storage. Already sent to my attorney. Already in the hands of the FBI. At the word FBI, Vivian's eyes darted around the lobby. For the first time, she noticed the agent's position throughout the space. You bitch, Vivian hissed. You set me up. No, Elena said calmly. I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. You chose to take it. Agent Martinez stood up from her table and walked over, her badge visible. Vivian Chase, also known as Vivian Castellano, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and wire fraud. As the handcuffs clicked around Vivian's wrists, she looked at Elena with pure hatred. You think you've won? She snarled. Your husband is still going to prison. Your marriage is still over. Your life is still ruined. Elena looked down at this woman who had tried to destroy everything she'd built, everything she loved. My marriage was over the moment Daniel chose you over me, Elena said quietly. My life? My life is just beginning. As Agent Martinez led Vivian away, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from the surveillance team, Daniel Brooks in custody. Jonathan Pierce en route to the federal building. It's over. Elena sat back down in the hotel lobby and ordered a coffee. For the first time in 12 years, she felt free. That evening, Elena stood in the conference room at Brooks Global, addressing the emergency board meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, I'm happy to report that the FBI has recovered $38 million of the $47 million that was stolen from this company. The remaining funds should be recoverable through asset forfeiture proceedings. Relief was visible on every face around the table. Additionally, Elena continued, I'm implementing new financial controls to ensure this kind of fraud can never happen again. All major expenditures will require dual authorization. All vendors will be independently verified. All executive expenses will be reviewed monthly by an external auditing firm. Harrison Finch cleared his throat. Mrs. Brooks, what about leadership? Moving forward, I mean. Elena looked around the table at these people who had dismissed her for years, who had treated her like decoration, who had never imagined she could be anything more than Daniel's supportive wife. I'll be serving as CEO permanently, she said. This company was built on strong fundamentals and good strategy. It's time to get back to those roots. Margaret Flores leaned forward. Do you have experience running a company this size? Elena smiled. Margaret, I've been running this company for 12 years. I just did it quietly. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, a detailed business plan for Brooks Global's future. Sustainable growth strategies. Ethical investment policies. Employee profit-sharing programs. This is what we're going to build, Elena said. Not just a profitable company, but a company we can be proud of. A company that creates value instead of extracting it. A company that treats its employees, its investors, and its community with respect. She looked around the table one more time. Questions? There were none. Later that night, Elena sat alone in her office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Her phone rang. It was Charles. How are you holding up? He asked. Better than I expected, Elena said honestly. Is Daniel? He's cooperating. Pierce is negotiating a plea deal. Probably 5 to 7 years instead of 30. Charles paused. Elena, he wants to see you. Elena closed her eyes. I'm not ready for that. I know. But he's asking about the company. About what happens to Brooks Global. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happens is that it goes back to being what it was always supposed to be. A company that builds things instead of stealing them. And Daniel's shares? Will be sold to pay restitution to the victims of Vivian's fraud. Elena's voice was firm. Every penny. Elena, Charles said gently, are you sure you're okay? This has been a lot. Elena looked around her office, the CEO office she'd never thought she'd occupy, in the company she'd built from the ground up, surrounded by the success she'd created and Daniel had nearly destroyed. Charles, she said, I spent 12 years being invisible. Being the woman behind the man. Being the quiet wife who supported her husband's dreams at the expense of her own. She paused, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. I'm not that woman anymore. And I'm not going back to being her ever again. After she hung up, Elena worked until midnight, planning the future of Brooks Global. Planning her future. For the first time in 12 years, it belonged entirely to her. And it was going to be extraordinary. Elena had avoided this moment for as long as possible. 3 weeks of running Brooks Global, 3 weeks of rebuilding what Daniel and Vivian had torn down, 3 weeks of discovering just how powerful she could be when she stopped hiding in the shadows. But some conversations couldn't be avoided forever. She sat across from Daniel in the sterile visiting room, a thick sheet of bulletproof glass between them. He looked different, thinner, older, his expensive suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. The confident CEO she'd married was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He picked up the phone on his side of the glass. Elena hesitated, then picked up hers. Elena. His voice was hoarse. Thank you for coming. She studied his face, looking for some trace of the man she'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. Charles said you wanted to see me. I did. I do. Daniel leaned forward. Elena, I need you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. For Vivian, for the company, for the way I treated you. I'm so sorry. Elena felt nothing. The words she'd once desperately wanted to hear now felt empty, meaningless. Are you sorry you did it, she asked quietly, or sorry you got caught? Daniel flinched. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I was so blind, so stupid. Daniel. Elena's voice cut through his apologies. Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the stealing. He looked up at her, confusion in his eyes. It was watching you erase me from our story. Watching you pretend that you built Brooks Global alone. Watching you take credit for 12 years of my work, my sacrifice, my vision. Elena's voice was steady, but he could see the pain underneath. You didn't just betray our marriage, Daniel. You betrayed our partnership. Elena, I never meant. Yes, you did. Elena leaned back in her chair. You meant every second of it. You loved being the brilliant CEO. You loved the admiration, the respect, the power. And you couldn't stand sharing that with the wife who made it all possible. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost couldn't hear him, you're right. Elena blinked, surprised by his honesty. I did love it, Daniel continued. I loved being Daniel Brooks, the self-made success story. I loved pretending I was this brilliant businessman instead of what I really was. What were you really? Daniel looked down at his hands. A failed construction contractor who married the smartest woman he'd ever met and spent 12 years taking credit for her genius. For a moment, just a moment, Elena saw a flash of the man she'd fallen in love with. The man who'd been humble enough to ask for her help, vulnerable enough to admit he needed saving. What happened to us? She asked. Success happened. Ego happened. I started believing my own mythology. Daniel looked up at her through the glass. And you were too good to me. Too supportive. You never demanded credit, never insisted on recognition. You let me take all the glory, and eventually, I convinced myself I deserved it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. The worst part, Daniel continued, is that I knew. Deep down, I always knew that you were the real power behind Brooks Global. I knew you were smarter than me, more strategic, more visionary. And instead of celebrating that, instead of being proud to be married to someone so extraordinary, I resented it. Resented it? I resented feeling like the junior partner in my own marriage. I resented that the board members respected your opinions more than mine. I resented that when we had problems, everyone expected Elena Brooks to solve them. Daniel's voice cracked. So I pushed you out. I made you invisible. I pretended you didn't matter because it made me feel like I mattered more. Elena stared at this man she'd loved for so long, finally hearing the truth she'd been waiting 12 years to hear. And Vivian? She asked. Daniel's laugh was bitter. Vivian made me feel like the man I pretended to be. Brilliant. Powerful. Self-made. She never questioned my decisions, never offered better ideas, never made me feel inadequate. He paused. Of course, that's because she was robbing me blind the entire time. Did you know? About her real identity, her plans? No. Not until the FBI told me. Daniel looked up at her. Elena, you have to believe me. I thought she loved me. I thought I loved her. I had no idea she was what she was. Elena did believe him. Which somehow made it worse. So you destroyed our marriage for a lie, she said. I destroyed our marriage because I was too much of a coward to face the truth about myself. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass. Elena, is there any chance, any possibility, that we could try again? Elena finished. That I could forgive you? Daniel nodded, hope flickering in his eyes. Elena looked at this man she'd loved, this man she'd built a life with, this man who'd betrayed her in every way possible. She thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about the woman she'd been who would have done anything to save her marriage. Daniel, she said gently, I do forgive you. The hope in his eyes blazed brighter. But I'm not coming back to you. The hope died. The woman you married, the one who sacrificed her own ambitions to support yours, who stayed invisible to make you look good, who forgave every small betrayal because she loved you, that woman is gone. Elena's voice was calm, final. She died the night you humiliated her at the gala. Elena. What's left is me. Just me. Elena Brooks, CEO of Brooks Global Enterprises. Elena Brooks, who spent 12 years building an empire and is finally ready to run it. Elena Brooks, who won't settle for being anyone's second choice ever again. Send him in, Elena said. A moment later, Marcus walked into her office, carrying a small bouquet of white roses. I hope I'm not intruding, he said, his voice warm. I read about your speech today and wanted to wish you luck. Elena accepted the flowers, touched by the gesture. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. I also wanted to apologize, Marcus continued. When we met last month, I had no idea who you really were. I mean, I knew you were Elena Brooks, but I didn't know you were the Elena Brooks. The architect of Brooks Global's expansion strategy. The woman who turned a failing construction company into a real estate empire. Elena tilted her head, curious. How do you know about that? Marcus smiled. Because I've been studying Brooks Global's development strategy for years. Your fingerprints are all over the brilliant decisions, the sustainable housing projects, the community-focused developments, the innovative financing structures. I always wondered who the strategic mind was behind Daniel Brooks' supposed genius. And now you know it was the wife everyone ignored. Now I know it was a brilliant businesswoman who was finally ready to step out of the shadows. Marcus's eyes met hers. Elena, I came here to ask you something. What's that? Would you have dinner with me? Not as a business meeting, not as networking. Just dinner. With a man who's genuinely interested in getting to know the real Elena Brooks. Elena felt something flutter in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Interest. Attraction. The possibility of being wanted for who she really was, not who she pretended to be. I'm not sure I'm ready for. I'm not asking you to be ready for anything, Marcus said gently. I'm asking you to have dinner with someone who thinks you're remarkable. Someone who'd like to hear your stories, your ideas, your dreams for the future. He paused. Someone who has no interest in keeping you invisible. Elena looked at this man who was offering her something she'd almost forgotten existed, the chance to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen for her strength instead of despite it. Okay, she said. I'd like that. Marcus's smile was radiant. Saturday night? I know a place that serves incredible seafood and has a view of the lake. Saturday sounds perfect. After Marcus left, Elena sat at her desk, touching the white roses and feeling something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not hope for the past to be restored, but hope for the future to be extraordinary. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at 800 of Chicago's most powerful business leaders. 6 months ago, most of these people wouldn't have known her name. Today, they were here to hear her story. Good afternoon, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My name is Elena Brooks, and until recently, I was invisible. A murmur went through the crowd. For 12 years, I was the woman behind the man. The supportive wife. The quiet partner. The strategic mind that everyone assumed belonged to someone else. Elena's voice grew stronger. I'm here today to talk about visibility, power, and what happens when women stop hiding their light under someone else's bushel. For the next 45 minutes, Elena told her story. Not the sanitized version that protected Daniel's reputation, but the truth. The real story of how Brooks Global was built, how it was nearly destroyed, and how it was saved. She talked about the cost of invisible labor, about women who sacrificed their own ambitions to support their partner's dreams. She talked about the courage it takes to step out of the shadows and claim what's rightfully yours. The most dangerous thing about being invisible, Elena said, is that eventually, you start to believe you don't deserve to be seen. You start to think that your contributions don't matter, that your ideas aren't valuable, that your dreams aren't worth pursuing. She paused, looking around the room. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. Your contributions matter. Your ideas are valuable. Your dreams are worth fighting for. And you, all of you, deserve to be seen, recognized, and celebrated for the extraordinary things you're capable of. The applause was thunderous. During the Q&A session that followed, a young woman in the audience raised her hand. Mrs. Brooks, she said, what advice would you give to women who feel like they're invisible in their own careers? Elena thought for a moment. Stop waiting for permission to shine, she said finally. Stop waiting for someone else to recognize your value. Stop hoping that if you work hard enough, stay quiet enough, support others enough, you'll eventually be rewarded with the recognition you deserve. She leaned forward, speaking directly to the young woman. Your brilliance is not a gift to be given to others. It's a power to be claimed by you. So claim it. Own it. Use it. And never, ever apologize for being extraordinary. The audience rose to their feet, applauding for a full minute. As Elena left the stage, she felt the final pieces of her old life falling away. The invisible wife was gone forever. In her place stood Elena Brooks, CEO, leader, and a woman who would never hide in anyone's shadow again. That evening, Elena stood in her new penthouse apartment, looking out at Lake Michigan. She'd moved out of the house she'd shared with Daniel the day before. Too many memories, too much history. This place was hers alone, modern, clean, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in all the light. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer from the office. Mrs. Brooks, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I wanted you to know, we've gotten over 200 applications for the internship program you announced today. Elena smiled. She'd announced a new initiative during her speech, a mentorship program for young women in business, designed to help them build confidence and claim their power early in their careers. 200? In one afternoon? Yes, ma'am. And Mrs. Brooks? The Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature story about your transformation. CNN wants you for their Sunday business show. And, Jennifer paused, excitement in her voice. Harvard Business School wants to offer you a guest lectureship on strategic leadership. Elena felt a warm glow of satisfaction. For 12 years, she'd been brilliant in private. Now, finally, the world was taking notice. Schedule them all, Elena said. It's time for Elena Brooks to be very, very visible. After she hung up, Elena poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the windows, watching the city lights sparkle below. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, saw your speech on the news. Magnificent. Can't wait for Saturday. Elena smiled, typing back, looking forward to it. As she set her phone aside, Elena realized something had fundamentally shifted inside her. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't defining herself in relation to someone else. She wasn't Daniel's wife, or Marcus's potential girlfriend, or even her employee's boss. She was just Elena. Powerful, brilliant, successful Elena. A woman who had built an empire, survived betrayal, and emerged stronger than ever. A woman who would never be invisible again. Elena raised her glass to her reflection in the window. To new beginnings, she said aloud. Outside, the city sparkled with infinite possibility. And for Elena Brooks, the best was yet to come. 6 months later. Elena stood at the head of the boardroom table, looking out at faces that had once dismissed her as decoration. Today, they hung on her every word. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking to the first slide of her presentation, "I'm pleased to report that Brooks Global has had its most profitable quarter in company history." The numbers on the screen were staggering. Revenue up 40%. Profit margins doubled. Stock price at an all-time high. More importantly, Elena continued, "We've done this while implementing the most comprehensive ethical business practices in our industry. Fair wages, sustainable development, community investment, profitability and principles aren't mutually exclusive." Harrison Finch leaned forward. "Mrs. Brooks, these results are extraordinary. How did you achieve this level of growth so quickly?" Elena smiled. "By doing what we should have been doing all along, focusing on long-term value creation instead of short-term profit extraction. By treating our employees, our communities, and our investors as partners instead of resources to be exploited." She clicked to the next slide, showing employee satisfaction scores, community impact metrics, environmental sustainability data. When you build on solid foundations instead of hollow promises, growth is sustainable. When you lead with integrity instead of ego, people trust you with their dreams. Elena's voice carried quiet power. "Brooks Global isn't just rebuilding from the damage Daniel and Vivian caused. We're becoming something better than we ever were before." Margaret Flores raised her hand. "What about the mentorship program you launched?" Elena's face lit up. "Our Rising Leaders Initiative has enrolled 300 young women this year. We're providing mentorship, networking opportunities, and seed funding for women-owned businesses. Next quarter, we're expanding to include a scholarship program for women pursuing advanced degrees in business and engineering." She clicked a slide showing photos from recent mentorship events, young women in business suits, confident and ambitious, learning from successful executives. "The goal isn't just to create successful businesses," Elena said. "It's to create a generation of women who never have to choose between being visible and being valued." The room erupted in applause. As the meeting concluded, Elena felt the satisfaction of a job not just well done, but done right. This was what power was supposed to feel like, not dominance over others, but the ability to lift everyone up. Her phone buzzed as the last shareholders filed out. A text from Marcus: "Dinner tonight? I have something important to ask you." Elena's heart fluttered. They'd been dating for 5 months now, and every day with him felt like discovering a new part of herself. Marcus didn't want her to be smaller so he could feel bigger. He celebrated her success, challenged her ideas, supported her dreams. She typed back, "Can't wait. My place at 7? His response was immediate: "Perfect. I love you, Elena." Elena stared at the words on her screen. They'd been dancing around those 3 words for weeks, both feeling them but neither quite brave enough to say them first. She typed back, "I love you too." That evening. Elena's penthouse. Elena was putting the finishing touches on dinner when Marcus arrived, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a nervous smile that made her pulse quicken. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing her softly. "But then again, you always do." Elena laughed. "Flattery will get you everywhere. What's the champagne for?" "That depends on your answer to a question I'm going to ask." Elena's breath caught. "Marcus. Let me say this first," he interrupted gently. "Elena, 6 months ago, I met a woman at a charity gala who took my breath away. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was brilliant and kind and had this quiet strength that filled the room." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "I had no idea I was meeting someone who was about to transform not just her own life, but the lives of hundreds of people around her. Someone who was about to show the world what real leadership looks like." Marcus took her hands in his. "I've watched you rebuild a company, mentor young women, turn betrayal into triumph, and somehow manage to be more generous and loving than you were before your world fell apart." He paused. "Elena Brooks, you are the strongest, most extraordinary woman I've ever known. And I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Marcus could hear it. "So my question is this," Marcus continued, dropping to one knee and pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Elena stared at the ring, a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the light from her floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt the last pieces of her old life finally, completely fall away. Daniel had proposed to her in a crowded restaurant, making a show of it for everyone to see. This was quiet, private, just for them. Daniel had promised to love her but spent 12 years making her smaller. Marcus was promising to love her while celebrating everything that made her powerful. "Yes," Elena whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena felt the future opening up before them like a door to infinite possibility. I love you, Marcus said, standing to kiss her. I love your brilliance and your ambition and the way you light up when you talk about the women in your mentorship program. I love how you've turned pain into purpose, betrayal into strength. Elena looked into his eyes and saw what she'd been searching for her entire life, a partner who wanted to build something beautiful together, not someone who wanted her to shrink so he could shine. I love you too, she said. More than I ever thought possible. As they celebrated with champagne and Chinese takeout, Marcus's suggestion, because he knew how much Elena loved staying in and talking for hours, Elena's phone rang. She almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Agent Martinez. I should take this, Elena said apologetically. Elena, Agent Martinez's voice was excited. I wanted you to be the first to know. Vivian was sentenced today. 25 years federal prison, no possibility of parole for 15 years. Elena sat down heavily. 25 years. The judge called it one of the most comprehensive financial fraud cases she'd ever seen. Vivian's schemes went back over a decade, multiple victims, dozens of companies. Agent Martinez paused. Elena, your testimony was crucial. The recording you made, the evidence you provided, without that, she might have gotten away with everything. After Elena hung up, Marcus took her hand. How do you feel? He asked. Elena thought about it. Relieved. Satisfied. But not vindictive. She made her choices. Now she lives with the consequences. And Daniel? Elena looked out at the city lights, thinking about the man she'd once loved more than life itself. Daniel got 5 years. He'll be out in 3 with good behavior. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact. Marcus said he's been a model prisoner. Quiet, remorseful, spending his time in the library and teaching literacy classes. Do you think you'll ever see him again? Elena considered the question. Maybe. Someday. When enough time has passed that we can just be 2 people who shared a history, not 2 people carrying all this pain and betrayal. She squeezed Marcus's hand. But that's in the future. Right now, I'm exactly where I want to be. Marcus lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the engagement ring that sparkled on her finger. Building something beautiful with someone who sees all of you, he said. Building something beautiful with someone who makes me want to be even more myself than I already am, Elena corrected. 1 year later. Elena stood at the podium in the gleaming auditorium of the new building that bore her name, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to mentoring, education, and empowerment for women in business. 1 year ago, she said to the packed auditorium, I was a woman hiding in the shadows of someone else's success. I thought my value came from how well I supported other people's dreams. I thought visibility meant vulnerability, and power meant taking something away from someone else. In the front row, Marcus sat beaming with pride. Beside him were Elena's ments from the first year of the program, 12 young women who were already making waves in their respective industries. I was wrong about all of it, Elena continued. Visibility means authenticity. Power means lifting others up. And the dreams that matter most are the ones we fight for ourselves. She clicked a slide showing the program's first-year results, 50 businesses launched by program graduates, 200 women promoted to leadership positions, over $5 million in funding secured for women-led ventures. But the numbers don't tell the real story, Elena said. The real story is about transformation. It's about women who discovered they didn't need permission to be brilliant. Women who learned that their ideas have value, their voices matter, and their success doesn't take away from anyone else's. She looked directly at her ments. It's about young women who will never have to choose between being seen and being respected. Who will never have to make themselves smaller to make others feel bigger. Who will never confuse being supportive with being invisible. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Elena mingled with program participants, donors, and business leaders who'd come to celebrate the center's first anniversary. She was deep in conversation with a young entrepreneur about expansion plans when she felt a gentle touch on her arm. She turned and froze. Daniel stood behind her, dressed in a simple navy suit, looking older but somehow more at peace than she'd seen him in years. Prison had changed him, the arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like humility. Hello, Elena, he said quietly. I hope it's okay that I'm here. I heard about the center and wanted to congratulate you. Elena glanced around, noticing that conversation had stopped as people recognized the former CEO whose downfall had been front-page news. Daniel. Her voice was calm, controlled. I heard you were released. 3 weeks ago. Good behavior. Daniel's smile was rueful. Amazing what happens when you stop thinking you're the smartest person in the room. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, 12 years of history hanging between them. Elena, Daniel said finally, I came here to apologize. Not to ask for forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that. Just to tell you that I'm sorry. For all of it. For wasting your brilliance, for taking credit for your work, for betraying you in every way it's possible to betray someone. Elena looked at this man who'd once been her whole world. She felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no residual love. Just a kind of distant sadness for what they'd lost, what they'd never really had. I accept your apology, she said. And I hope you find peace, Daniel. I hope you figure out who you really are and build a life you can be proud of. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You're extraordinary, Elena. You always were. I just wasn't strong enough to celebrate that instead of competing with it. Before Elena could respond, Marcus appeared at her side, sliding a protective arm around her waist. Elena, he said, his voice carrying just the right note of concern without being threatening. Marcus, this is Daniel, Elena said. Daniel, this is my fiancé, Marcus Rodriguez. The two men shook hands, and Elena could see Daniel taking in everything Marcus represented, the way he stood close to Elena without crowding her, the pride in his eyes when he looked at her, the complete absence of ego or insecurity. Congratulations, Daniel said sincerely. Both of you. Elena deserves someone who sees her for who she really is. Thank you, Marcus replied. She does. Daniel nodded and turned back to Elena. I won't take up any more of your time. I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of what you've built here. This center, the mentorship program, the way you've turned your pain into purpose, it's remarkable. He paused, looking around the gleaming facility. This is what you should have been doing all along. Leading. Inspiring. Changing the world. Daniel's voice was soft. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to realize how much I was holding you back. After Daniel left, Elena stood with Marcus in the lobby of the center, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as her former husband disappeared into the Chicago night. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Elena thought about it. Free, she said finally. For the first time since that night at the gala, I feel completely free. Marcus kissed her temple. Ready to go home, future Mrs. Rodriguez? Elena laughed. I'm keeping Brooks professionally, you know. Elena Brooks Rodriguez at home, Elena Brooks in the boardroom. I wouldn't have it any other way, Marcus said. The world needs to know exactly who Elena Brooks is. 2 years later. Elena stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite of the Four Seasons, adjusting her dress, a stunning creation in ivory silk that made her look like a queen. But it wasn't the dress that made her glow. It was the joy radiating from every part of her being. You look beautiful, said Anna, one of her mentor who'd become a close friend and was serving as her maid of honor. But more than that, you look happy. Elena smiled, touching the simple pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's. I am happy. Completely, utterly, ridiculously happy. Jennifer, her assistant and now friend, peeked her head in. Mrs. Brooks? It's time. Elena took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the invisible wife who'd attended that gala 3 years ago. This woman was confident, powerful, radiant with the knowledge of her own worth. As Elena walked down the aisle, she saw the faces of everyone who mattered, her mentor, her colleagues, Marcus's family who'd welcomed her with open arms, the board members who now respected her as the visionary leader she'd always been. But mostly, she saw Marcus waiting for her at the altar, his face shining with love and pride. When they reached the part of the ceremony where they exchanged vows, Elena spoke from her heart. Marcus, 3 years ago, I thought I knew what love was. I thought it meant making yourself smaller, supporting someone else's dreams, staying invisible so someone else could shine. You taught me that real love means celebrating each other's strength, not competing with it. You taught me that the right person doesn't want you to be less, they inspire you to be more. She paused, looking into his eyes. You see me, Marcus. All of me. My ambition, my drive, my dreams, my flaws, my fears, and you love all of it. You make me want to be the best version of myself while never making me feel like the current version isn't enough. Elena's voice grew stronger. I promise to build a life with you that's based on partnership, not hierarchy. Where we celebrate each other's victories and support each other through challenges. Where neither of us has to hide our light to make the other feel brighter. When Marcus spoke his vows, his voice was thick with emotion. Elena, when I first saw you at that charity gala, I was struck by your grace, your intelligence, your quiet strength. But watching you transform over these past 3 years, watching you step into your power, claim your worth, and use your success to lift up others, has been the privilege of my lifetime. He took her hands. You are brilliant and beautiful and brave and kind. You are a leader who inspires others to be their best selves. You are a woman who turned betrayal into triumph, pain into purpose, invisible into extraordinary. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I promise to spend every day of our marriage making sure you know how extraordinary you are. I promise to be your partner, not your follower or your leader, but you're equal in building something beautiful together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was full of promise, passion, and the deep joy of two people who'd found their perfect match. Elena and Marcus's first dance was to At Last by Etta James, a song that perfectly captured Elena's journey from invisible to extraordinary, from hidden to whole. As they swayed together on the dance floor, Elena looked around at the celebration. Her mates were laughing with Marcus's business partners. Board members who'd once dismissed her were deep in conversation about the next expansion of the Women's Leadership Center. Everyone she cared about was here, celebrating not just her marriage but the incredible life she'd built. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus whispered in her ear. "How perfect this is," Elena said. "How right everything feels." "Any regrets?" Elena thought about Daniel, somewhere in Chicago building a new life for himself. About Vivian, serving her sentence in federal prison. About the woman she'd been who'd accepted scraps of recognition while building empires for other people. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." As the song ended, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from one of her mates who couldn't make the wedding. "Thank you for showing me what real power looks like. Starting my own company next month. Following your example, visible, valuable, and never apologizing for being extraordinary." Elena showed Marcus the message, and he smiled. "Think you're ready to add wife to all your other titles?" he asked. Elena laughed, pulling him closer. "I'm ready for everything. Wife, CEO, mentor, partner, all of it. For the first time in my life, I don't have to choose between different parts of myself. I can be all of it." As the evening continued, Elena gave a speech that brought the entire room to tears. 3 years ago, I was a woman who thought her value came from how well she supported someone else's success. I thought being a good wife meant being invisible. I thought love meant sacrifice instead of celebration." She looked at Marcus, then at all the faces around her. "I was wrong about everything. The right love doesn't ask you to be smaller, it inspires you to be bigger. The right partnership doesn't require one person to hide so the other can shine, it celebrates both people's light." Elena's voice grew stronger. "And the right life isn't built on hiding your gifts or minimizing your dreams. It's built on using your talents to their fullest, pursuing your ambitions without apology, and lifting up others while you rise." She raised her glass. "To partnerships that make us stronger, not smaller. To love that celebrates our power instead of fearing it. And to every woman who refuses to choose between being seen and being respected." The toast that followed was deafening. 5 years later, Elena stood in her office at Brooks Global, now one of the most respected real estate development companies in the Midwest, reading the Forbes article that had just hit newsstands. The Forbes 40 Under 40, Elena Brooks Rodriguez, CEO of Brooks Global Enterprises, founder of the Brooks Center for Women's Leadership, and the woman redefining corporate power in America. The article detailed not just her business success, but her impact on women's leadership, sustainable development, and ethical business practices. Brooks Global had become a case study taught in business schools across the country. "Good article?" Marcus asked, walking into her office with coffee and a smile. "Surreal article," Elena said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." Marcus sat on the edge of her desk, looking at the woman he'd married, confident, successful, radiating the kind of power that came from knowing exactly who you were. "Believe it," he said. "You earned every word of that recognition." Elena's assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Brooks Rodriguez? Your 2 o'clock is here." "Send her in," Elena said. A young woman walked in, maybe 25, nervous but determined. She reminded Elena of herself at that age, before marriage, before invisibility, when she'd still believed she could conquer the world. "Ms. Patterson," Elena said warmly, gesturing to the chairs by her window. "Thank you for coming in. Tell me about your business plan." For the next hour, Elena listened to Sarah Patterson outline her vision for a sustainable fashion company that would employ women in underserved communities. The plan was ambitious, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of venture the Brooks Center's investment fund was designed to support. "Ms. Patterson," Elena said finally, "you have a brilliant idea and the drive to make it work. We'd be honored to partner with you." The young woman's face lit up. "Really? You'll fund us?" "We'll provide funding, mentorship, and access to our network." "But Sarah?" Elena leaned forward. "The most important thing I can give you is advice. Never, ever make yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Never hide your brilliance. Never apologize for being extraordinary." After Sarah left, Elena stood by her windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Her phone buzzed with birthday messages from men around the country, board members, colleagues, friends. One message made her pause. It was from Daniel. "Happy birthday, Elena. I hope you know how proud I am of everything you've accomplished. You deserve all the recognition you're getting and more. D. Elena smiled, typing back, "Thank you, Daniel. I hope you're well." It had taken years, but she'd finally reached a place where Daniel was just part of her past, not a source of pain or anger, but a chapter in her story that had led her to where she belonged. Marcus appeared beside her, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different everything is from how I imagined it would be," Elena said, leaning back against his chest. 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought betrayal had broken me permanently. And now?" Elena turned in his arms, looking at this man who'd helped her rebuild herself not by fixing her, but by celebrating her strength. "Now I realize it wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of the right story." Marcus kissed her forehead. "Ready for the next chapter?" Elena thought about all the dreams she still wanted to pursue, all the women she still wanted to mentor, all the love she still wanted to build with this extraordinary man. "More than ready," she said. "Bring it on." As the sun set over Chicago, Elena Brooks Rodriguez, CEO, mentor, wife, and the woman who'd turned invisible into extraordinary, smiled at the infinite possibility ahead of her. Her story wasn't just about surviving betrayal or building business success. It was about a woman who'd finally learned the most important truth of all. She was worth being seen. She was worth celebrating. And she would never, ever be invisible again. Epilogue, 10 years later. Elena stood before the U.S. Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, testifying about the legislation she'd helped craft, the Women's Economic Empowerment Act, designed to provide funding and support for women-owned businesses. "Senators," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd changed thousands of lives, economic empowerment isn't just about individual success. When women succeed, families prosper, communities thrive, and economies grow. The question isn't whether we can afford to invest in women's leadership. The question is whether we can afford not to. In the gallery, Marcus sat with their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, on his lap. Their little girl had Elena's determined chin and Marcus's gentle eyes, and Elena knew she was raising a daughter who would never doubt her own worth. As Elena concluded her testimony to bipartisan applause, she thought about the invisible woman she'd once been. That woman could never have imagined standing here, speaking to senators, influencing national policy. But that woman had also been brave in her own way. She'd endured. She'd built something beautiful even while hidden. She'd maintained her integrity even when it wasn't recognized. She'd been the foundation that made everything else possible. Elena Brooks Rodriguez, wife, mother, CEO, mentor, and the woman who'd redefined what power looked like, smiled as she left the Capitol building. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with forgiveness. The best stories end with transformation. And Elena's transformation, from invisible to extraordinary, was just the beginning of all the lives she would change, all the women she would inspire, and all the love she would build in the years to come. She was worth being seen. She was worth celebrating. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure every woman knew she was extraordinary too. The end. Dear incredible viewers, what a journey this has been. Elena's story reminds us that our worth isn't determined by how others treat us, it's determined by how we choose to see ourselves. If this story moved you, if Elena's transformation inspired you, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments below, what would you do if you discovered your own power? How would your life change if you stopped hiding your light? And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Every week, we explore stories of transformation, resilience, and the extraordinary strength that lives inside all of us. Your support means everything to me. Until next time, remember, you are worth being seen. You are worth celebrating. And you are never, ever invisible when you know your own worth.